My name is Kycell and I start this 37th chapter of my work chronicling the terrifying and destructive power of the mysterious cat-like woman, Regent Mother Selva, as she destroys the kingdom of Goldenirod. Both Ahani and myself were left speechless as volleys of enormous, enchanted arrows spewed from the warbow of the Regent Mother, all at the behest of Prince Dinge. From where we stood in the castle courtyard, the small section of Goldenirod visible to us was nearly entirely engulfed in azure flames. My first instinct was to return to the city and check on the well-being of those I've known and grown close to over my time in the town. Saika, Estelise, Valwen, the innkeeper, Perna, the babysitter, and especially Myrink and his infant son, Court. But the heavy treads of a group approaching to Ahani and mine's rear reminded us why we even dared returning to Minda's castle in the first place. The Laris de Chair, or Flesh Pounders, were making their way to the ostentatious, enormous spaniel-drawn carriage. The Cape Buffalo Minotaur, the four-armed pale bruiser, and the serene elf-woman with the insect man talisman made their way through the courtyard, with the young tigress princess, Walla, following stoically behind. The sight of the group quickly stifled my horror for the moment. Myrink was aboard the carriage, and her safety was the most immediate and pressing issue. As the group approached the carriage, the door swung open harshly, and out stepped yet another female figure. Much to my immediate discomfort, the form was that of an Aeriatric, the spidery race I had suffered at the many limbs of not too long ago. Putting my shameful prejudice aside for the moment, I studied the new woman carefully. She was far more petite than Acantha or her shorter husband Gemin, the pair that kidnapped Myrink, Ahani, and myself, and another trio of adventurers. Aside from her height, she was also a pitch black in carapace. Her 6 forelimbs that acted as arms were covered in nearly as much shaggy snow-colored hair as the wolf-like Rougarou Estelise. This was also in stark contrast to the pointy-bodied, bright yellow Acantha and the dull brown Gemin. She wore a leather vest similar to the kind Myrink wore. However, where Myrink had matching gun holsters, carrying a pair of twin revolvers bracketing her sides, this tiny spider had 6 distinct-looking firearms, lining rows of 3 against her back. I didn't have time to try and deduce the differences of each firearm, as she took a flying leap, several times higher, farther, and faster than I thought possible, humanly at least. She seemed to be greeting the group in quite a jovial manner. This seemed to be the custom among this organization. As the door slowly came to a close, Ahani and I both spotted the unconscious form of Myrink. I didn't have time to be sure, but it seemed her hands were heavily bandaged. Now was the time for us to make our move. But what could we possibly do? Most of these women looked far more deadly than many of the figures we'd encountered thus far. With deep consideration, we turned further away from the destruction Selva seemed to be winding down from. As the loosened bolts drew to a stop, and we made our way to the carriage. We made our way to the Fleshpounder's carriage, discussing in hushed voices what we should do. Tell them we work for the castle. Tell them we report to the Rospo Frogmen drug cartel in the city they're departing for. Sneak aboard underneath and try to grab Myrink when the opportunity rises. Finally, it was Ahani who thought that honesty was the best policy when dealing with what were essentially mercenaries. However, I brought up the fact that, with the princess with them, our real identities could still put us in a heap of trouble. So we decided to stick with our cover names and mix the truth with recent events. As we drew closer, we actually managed to hear the tail end of the Lavrie de Cher's plans. It was the Cape Buffalo Minotaur woman in the Aeriatric, who was undoubtedly Myrink's old teacher, Odegra.
All right, little Wallabunga's back to finish her training with Nazreen. Then, in a few years, she'll marry that frog prince over there, who seems to be busy kicking over the sandcastle his daddy brought him. Has little Triss woken up yet, Odegra?
When the wizened Minotaur woman said Nazreen, she pointed a hoven hand to the hulking four-armed woman, and she confirmed this spider was Odegra, and Myrink was in the carriage. I halted Ahani to hear a bit more. Now, Odegra chimed in.
No, she is still asleep. No clue what happened to her. But Fugazi vouched. She did go to work. Not sure she'll be down with rejoining. But, at best, she could come back to Anjong before she gets herself killed. What about the other girl we were promised?
She must have been referring to the young girl Perna, Court's babysitter, that was kidnapped by Fugazi and promised to this group. If this group was capable of aiding kidnapping, I was suddenly thankful Myrink at least managed to rescue her.
Oh, it seems when the castle was attacked yesterday, she seems to have fled, along with that fat little rat Aksur's wife, Soiree. I swear, you cannot hire a man or whatever Fugazi is to do a woman's job. I'm sorry, Isadora. She would have made a great pupil for you.
This time, the placid elf woman was the one to react, but she simply offered a shrug while maintaining that plastered-on smile of hers. Now it was the four-armed woman who spoke up next. She spoke through gritted fangs.
That little mutant's boss was an old friend of King Ludope. I'm betting they're all feeling quite embarrassed he didn't take our offer. Now come, Walla. We have a long journey ahead.
She then stomped her way past the rest of the group, Princess in tow, and entered the carriage, followed shortly by the elf, Isadora. But before the Minotaur or Odegra could enter, me and Ahani made our move and engaged the pair. We approached slowly, but I hoped confidently. The Aeriatric Odegra turned her several pairs of enormous, spidery eyes towards us, and the Minotaur woman inclined her head in our direction as well. I started off apologizing for interrupting them, and introduced myself using my false name. My name is Baisel Kakshi, and I work in the library here at Mindus Castle. I was doing research on the former king, the Minotaur Kronturg, and during this journey, I was traveling with Norwich Rawu here, I said, using Ahani's false name, and Myrink as our bodyguard. This last statement seemed to pique the pair's interest. I went on to say that she had yet to fulfill her contract before whatever attack happened on Mindus Castle, and if it was possible, we would like to continue to travel with her. Ahani then chimed in that she was a good friend, and we wanted to make sure that she was safe. The Minotaur seemed to find humor in Ahani's last statement. She then turned to Odegra.
I was curious why this pair was spying on us for the last hour or so. Even inside the castle tower, they were doing such a poor job. I assumed that they were not Sven's boys checking up on our poor Fugazi. Odegra, why don't you go and check on your old friend? It might be the last time before his boss gets his hands on him.
Nodding her wide, furry, and many-eyed head, Odegra made her way to the tower.
Oh, one more thing before I go. I heard little Triss was using my name while working. That was a very funny, but stupid, idiotic move.
As Odegra made her final exit, the Minotaur turned and started speaking once again.
Look, the Flesh Pounders don't like to leave work unfinished, and even if Triss thinks that she left, she will always be a member. Do you have any paper?
She began to poke at my bag of notebooks surreptitiously. I quickly found a blank page and removed it for her, as she seemingly produced a pen from nowhere and began to write.
We'll be in Scalamandry for a day or so, God's willing. We can discuss Myrink there, and if need be, another member to help at this location, providing compensation is adequate.
At this last statement, she reached into her robe's sleeve and produced the identical sack of gold Lord Carnager had given me each day of work. She then turned her back and also entered the carriage. Mildly concerned at such a sleight of hand, but still hopeful, Ahani and I stepped away from the carriage. As we backed from the carriage, we realized we now had time to check on our friends in the town and university. We ducked and dived past the demolition-focused ogres on Kotoblapas and readied to go back to the university. But as we crested the town, we saw it was nearly entirely reduced to rubble. We waded past streets and stores we'd passed a dozen times and saw many hurt and dying faces. There was nothing for us to do for them. The university seemed to be some kind of safe haven. Many citizens seemed to have brought their loved ones and friends here to be protected. The building seemed to be still in decent shape, possibly because they were out of Selva's bow range. We made our way to the Knights' headquarters and saw dozens of them gearing up for battle, and just as many helpfully ushering away hurt townsfolk. Just as we spotted Valwen hurriedly shouting orders to his men, as well as politely addressing Saika and Esteliz, who were offering triage to the truly impaired, we heard the blaring horns of war from our rear, in the direction of the castle. A battle was imminent.
Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell Bakshi, along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.